So let's discuss this impact and whether the boost in troop levels is just the beginning. Daveed Gartenstein-Ross joins me live here in Washington. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and an adjunct assistant professor at Georgetown University. Daveed, talk about the impact of this increase in U.S. troops heading to Syria.
It's hard to say right now. I mean, some of the U.S. troops who've been announced aren't in Syria proper, but instead are in Kuwait. That's the 1,000 reservists who've been announced. Obviously, the Marines who are going in, who were discussed in that report, are in fact not just in Syria, but close to Raqqa. It still leaves in place a lot of questions. Right now, there's a huge conflict between the U.S. and Turkey, with Turkey warning that if the Kurdish forces, the YPG, or sometimes they're called the Syrian Democratic Forces, are a part of the push to retake Raqqa, that will significantly damage U.S.-Turkish relations. So who the coalition is going to be, even though the U.S. forces are there, isn't entirely clear.
Well, you know, we mentioned this 68-member coalition that will be gathering. Will that coalition make any kind of a difference at all?
Absolutely it will. I mean, the coalition has been involved. If you look at especially some of the initial airstrikes against ISIS, if you look at where logistical routes are, it's important to have the coalition in place. But the majority of those countries are not going to have troops on the ground, nor could you have this, nor could you really do that feasibly. Right? It's already dangerous enough. Even small contingents of forces could come under fire from people who are nominally on the same side. I mean, if you start to break this down and look at the coalition and look at forces on the ground, I mentioned Turkey and the Kurds, who are on the same side, anti-ISIS, but in Turkey they're fighting each other. And the U.S. has supported some of the anti-Assad forces who are fighting the Russians, but Russia is also fighting to push out ISIS. So it gets very complex very quickly, and that's why even though you have 68 countries who are dedicated to toppling ISIS, at the same time, you can't just insert a bunch of ground troops and hope that things will turn out okay.
Well, let's talk about who is not part of the coalition. China, Russia, Syria. Can anything be accomplished without those countries?
Well, yeah, in the case of China, its doctrine of non-interference is one that obviously is shifting a bit as China has, for example, put troops into Afghanistan to protect its commercial interests. But this still isn't the kind of expeditionary warfare that China would really undertake. As for Russia, they are fighting ISIS. They're also fighting the anti-Assad forces, but one of the reasons that they're not part of this coalition is because they're basically staking down the fact that they're on Assad's side. They want Assad to stay up, whereas a lot of the GCC states, the Sunni states who want to see Assad topple, are part of this coalition. Nonetheless, Russia is fighting ISIS. It's just that they're not a part of the same coalition. They are taking steps to deconflict with the U.S. in order to make sure that Russia and the U.S. aren't hitting each other's ground forces. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. It's not clear that having Russia as part of the coalition would actually add a great deal. But what you're pointing to, of course, speaks to the fact that this is incredibly messy, and there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong.
We have about 30 seconds left. Daveed, can you indicate how the relationship right now between the United States and Russia and what's been playing out on the sidelines of all this will affect Syria?
It'll affect Syria in the sense of what happens to Assad, and also what happens after ISIS falls, which is one of those key questions that we don't have a great answer to. Right now, as with so many other things, the U.S.-Russia relationship is in flux, so that's another one of those big storylines that's worth watching.
All right, Daveed Gartenstein-Ross, thank you for your perspective. As you can see, still remains a very complicated situation.